50 out of 50 in English, 50 out of 50 in literature, 45 legal studies, ATAR of 99.3. How did you get the 50 and what is the best approach to that?
Planning is key. Don't neglect your planning time. Don't dilly-dally in your reading time. I'm not particularly good at science. I hate chemistry.
What are three kind of specific factors or contributors that you feel helped set you apart when it came to English?
For the text essay, meta-language like literary devices such as perspective, genre, imagery, characterization in the quotes is really good. How does the author characterize a certain individual and what does that suggest?
How long roughly were your essays?
So I would say
Hey everyone, it's Johnny from Jeddle, and I'm back today with an amazing guest, someone who just did incredibly well last year in the VCE. I'm here with Amelia. Amelia got 50 out of 50 in English, 50 out of 50 in literature, 45 legal studies, ATAR of 99.3. So I'm incredibly grateful to have you here, Amelia. Thank you so much, and congratulations on how well you did last year.
Well, thank you for having me.
Pleasure. So let's get straight into it. I'm keen to understand how you actually approached the VCE and did so well, especially in relation to English. So first question for you, what was your study routine throughout the year? And when it got close to those final exams, how much were you studying in that period?
I would say I kept pretty consistent throughout the year, especially with English. My main thing was rereading the text a lot. I think having a good idea of the text is really critical, especially when responding to the prompt, because the main thing the examiners are testing is how well you know the book and also how you can respond rather than sort of regurgitating something you've already written. I would study, I'm a bit of a serial procrastinator, so I found it was really helpful to study in different spaces so to like sort of keep my mind fresh. Going to the library is great, especially because there's lots of other people watching you. There might be a little bit of external pressure. When it got closer to the exams, like on swap back, I think I'd sort of clock in at school every day. I'd sit in the school library just to sort of keep some routine. And the school library has like glass windows, so I'd have the librarians walking past making sure I was studying. So yeah, I think I was probably studied just like a normal school day length, like 6 hours when it got close to exams, because I think that sort of maintained a nice routine, and then it sort of gave you time to like unwind at the end of the day, which I think is really important, because otherwise your sort of brain's going all the time and it's really easy to get like burnt out a little bit too soon.
And how many subjects would you be doing in each of those, say, 6-hour days?
Maths and science is not my strength, so I'd start with methods first, and then I do like a lot of methods because it kept my brain sort of sharp. And then I think it is good to switch between just sort of so you're getting something, and then I sort of like reward myself with English, if that makes sense, like, and then do something creative like planning out on the board. So going through different mediums, I think in a day, so maybe 2 to 3 subjects is good. I only did 4 subjects in year 12, so yeah, I would say 1 to 2 subjects, but don't jump back and forth too quickly, because it's nice to sort of focus on something for an hour, set a timer, and then be able to move on and sort of leave it behind, and then you can come back to it later.
Yeah, and even like the 6 hours a day, it's obviously a lot of time, but it's not a crazy amount of time given how well you did. So I guess second question for me is, what are 3 kind of specific factors or contributors that you feel helped set you apart when it came to English? Like how did you get the 50? And I know of course there's some subjectivity in there, but what do you think the things were that actually did set you apart and did allow you to differentiate?
I think number 1, if I was sort of to break it down into the different essays, I think the number 1 is having a good knowledge of the text. I was reading the book a lot. Talking about it in class is great, and also sharing your work with other people so you're getting a nice idea, because it's really great to develop your sort of own interpretation of the text that will help you respond directly to the question. Plans, I think, is good because it's better sort of to write. I didn't write heaps and heaps of practice essays because I feel like that sort of slows you down a bit. Writing lots of practice plans is great because you can respond to a variety of different topics in sort of style. Like it might be a how question or a discuss question, or like what they're talking about. I did flames and talking about like nature or love or whatever. I would say know quotes is great. Have a bank of quotes, but also the main thing with quotes is know how to break them down and analyze them. Be able to explain what the author is trying to suggest or condemn or praise through the quotes and through the book. So practice writing your views and value statements. For example, like Arnott praises the necessity of interpersonal connection to maintain purpose, and then be able to back it up with a little quote. Throughout the 3 texts, I'd say things to focus on in terms of like a objective English sense is meta-language, vocab, and your literary devices. For the text essay, meta-language like literary devices such as perspective, genre, imagery, characterization in the quotes is really good to sort of maintain sort of demonstrate how is Arnott using this, especially for a how question, like how does the author characterize a certain individual and what does that suggest for the topic. For your creative, I would say look at the framework of ideas. There should be some vocabulary related to it, so you can sort of keep linking that into your essay, because I know with creative sort of struggle a bit to stay on track in terms of the framework. So yeah, I would say integrate vocabulary a lot. And then with Apple, know your persuasive techniques, what, why, and then going a bit further in the Apple, explain like how, what is the intended impact of the audience? What does the author want them to do after that? So yeah, I would say always just going a little further in your analysis is great. And then planning is key. Don't neglect your planning time. Don't dilly-dally in your reading time. Going into the exam, knowing what you're going to do with your planning time is really important. So I sort of broke down my reading time in, start off by reading the Apple or the Analyzing Argument article, and then go to your text essay, choose a prompt, get an idea of your contention and what you're going to talk about, go to the creative, pick a creative, and then back to the Apple so you're fresh, because it's, I think starting writing with the Apple is great. And then when writing time starts, it's a little roundabout for me, but writing down your text essay plan. So because primarily the quotes, because it's very easy to forget them once you've started writing about your Apple. So write down some quotes, write down your contention, and then jot down your creative idea, just the idea, and then go start breaking down the Apple. Because I think the Apple's probably easiest to approach in the exam because the text is right there. There's not anything to remember. So, and you should be able to spend the least amount of time on it. So yeah, that's what I'd say. Go in having a really good knowledge of what you're going to do in your planning time will help you feel less stressed in the exam. And then it'll also help if you struggle with staying on track, especially in your text essay. Having your plan and knowing what you're linking back to is really important, just because that's the key thing with the examiner. They're going to be watching how well you're staying on topic. So yeah, that would be my advice for English.
Awesome. Yeah, great advice there. Just if I can do a couple of just little follow-ups there. You mentioned how important vocabulary is and also having that extra layer of depth in your analysis when it comes to authorial intent, like what was the purpose behind this, not just giving the kind of direct, obvious meaning. So was there anything in particular you did to build that vocabulary? Where were you kind of sourcing the materials and expanding the vocabulary?
Hey everyone, it's Johnny from Jettle, and if you want to check out state rank examples, Band 6 analysis, step-by-step guides to constructing the perfect essays, craft of writing pieces, whatever it is that you need for your English exams, then go to jettle.com. We've put everything in one place for you so that you don't need to look any further to get everything you need to succeed in your exams. And if you want to submit a draft and get expert marking, or you want to use our marking tools to get specific suggestions on how you can improve your essays, your creative writing pieces, anytime, anywhere, make sure you sign up to Jedi today.
So keep reading, I think, is important. And I've always sort of read a lot, so that'll be great in developing your vocab over time. But I think discussing in class is really important for understanding where the author's coming from, because someone else might have thought of something that you haven't thought of, or your teacher might have thought of something you haven't thought of, and you can sort of amalgamate that into one great idea. And then in terms of authorial intent, sometimes we think of stuff that the authors weren't actually thinking about, but that's still great too to put in your essay. But sometimes if you can find things online, like watching interviews with the author about their text, that's really great to sort of get a background knowledge, or do some research. If your text is very sort of imagery and plot heavy, like we did Flames, do some research on the location or the history of the time or things like that is sort of great to build a knowledge. And it can help you with analyzing, why is the author saying this? What does this mean? And what are they trying to suggest to the audience? What are we supposed to take away from it? But in terms of vocab doesn't necessarily have to mean like fancy words. It can just be a very a specific, I think a specific term is great when you're breaking down what they're saying, like with a positive or negative connotation, like condemns or applauds can create, like, instead of demonstrates or shows, can sort of show to the assessor that you've got a really good idea of how the author is trying to put across this point.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That's really good advice. So being a little bit more deliberate with your verbs and the kinds of words you're using, but they don't have to be super fancy for anyone worrying about, where am I going to get that vocab from?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be. Just maybe if you make a bank as well as your quotes, a bank of adverbs of what the author's trying to do, that's really great to be able to sort of circle back. And you don't have to have a lot.
You mentioned that you definitely knew your quotes well and you'd try and jot them down in planning time. Did you have a kind of base essay for the text responses that you at least knew to have as a backup, or you kind of were just you'd done a lot of practice? How did you go in there feeling confident that you definitely have high quality material to use that also responded to the prompt?
I think we were definitely warned against preparing something, and also I don't have the memory to make an essay to sort of regurgitate, and I think that would be a thing I'd say don't prepare a text essay ahead of time, because they know if you've written something and tried to reframe it. I think it could actually be harder to reframe a text you've already written to try and adhere to a topic. So I would say if your school's like made a list of practice plans, or you can find practice topics, and you can find practice topics online, I would go through, do 5 or so practice plans in a row, and each is a different concept or a different structure. And I think that way you'll get a lot more confident in being able to write down 3 key ideas in a contention, and then be able to link a few little quotes under it. And keep your quotes short is my other thing, like 2 to 3 words, maybe 4 words. Because it's really nice if you can integrate them so they can flow in a sentence, and then be able to do a lot of time analysis rather than just put a big chunk of text in. And then you can be sort of more deliberate with how the quotes actually connect to the analysis that you're making. And if you can have a quote that sort of demonstrates some characterization or genre or meta language like that, that can be really nice to sort of integrate it into it. But then again, that might just be the literature talking. They got a bit conflated, I suppose. But yeah, I would say having a very structured essay plan, and then also structured way of how you write the essay is really helpful for staying on track. Like I always my essays were always 3 paragraphs, intro and conclusion if I had 3 minutes left to write it down, so you can sort of link back quite easily. And then so sort of my essay structure would be do an introduction, sort of quickly establish the text in its genre and its background. For example, a starter would be In Flames, Robbie Arnott's Mythical Tasmania provides a basis for, and then you've sort of got somewhere to start. So that would be the thing that I prepare, sort of a little background info. If you struggle with putting the pen to paper and like starting the essay, if like the blank page is really overwhelming, have a little quite permeable, like little starter that you can then go on and start writing from, and have a contention. So it was kind of silly, but the first thing I do in my plan was I'd write down the topic. So I was thinking about it as I wrote it. And then I'd either go, if it worked, if it wasn't a how question, I'd go yes, or I'd write no, and then go from there. Cause then you've already, what stance you're taking, if that makes sense. So you can sort of and a nice way to do it if you want to sort of maintain a bit of, on the fenceness, if you will, like do sort of 2 agreeing paragraphs, and then a little opposite is a nice way to think about it. And it's a good way to start if you don't know how to break it down, or if you're trying to like work on responding directly to the prompt, just writing down yes or writing down no, and then say why in your 3 topic sentences and in your contention. But always have a contention that you can link back to. Like every time you finish your quote, and you finish your analysis, then look back at your contention and go, does this make sense? Because I think especially in the 3rd paragraph, it can be really easy to fall off the rails with, like, your analysis might be great and it might be a really great indication of what the author's saying, but you look back at your the topic and you've fallen off a little bit. So I'd say sticking to your plan is great. Having a plan before you write is really important. And even if you don't finish your last paragraph or whatever, if you've stuck to the plan and keep linking back, I'd say it's like really valuable and shows the assessors that even if you're running out of time, you're still thinking about what you're doing.
Yeah, that's great. And one kind of final question here. So how long roughly were your essays when you did practice questions and whatnot? Because people always wonder, like, how long, what's the kind of minimum amount of words it has to be to be in contention for, a really top mark? So do you know roughly, you mentioned it's 3 body paragraphs, how many words, or, how many kind of sentences per paragraph if it's easier?
I think it can be a bit stressful when you start to quantify like how much is a good essay, because a good essay can really depend. I would say to demonstrate that you've got a varied knowledge, probably 3 body paragraphs and then 2 to 3 examples with some quotes in, which I wouldn't go too far writing too much on something really, like I would keep it pretty balanced. So 2 to 3 examples with some quotes or a background if you can't remember the quote, and then sort of sustain that throughout the text. But then again, like a shorter essay could still be worth more or less. I think length is less valuable in English than it is in Lit. I know in Lit you have to write just heaps, but yeah, I would say focus on like what you're writing rather than how much you're writing at the start, and then you can sort of keep going if you're like struggling. Like you can always build, if that's what it's like, sort of get a variety of ideas down before you start to like expand too much so it doesn't become unbalanced. But yeah, probably like 800,000 words. But it's hard to tell because I have quite poor handwriting. Like, so my words are quite big. It takes up a lot of pages.
Yes, and look, maybe subconsciously that helps as well. Some people say, but not if we're really looking at it. Some people say try and write a little bit bigger so you have more pages. But
yeah, and that it will help the assessors if you have messy handwriting like me.
Yes, true. And then finally, with the framework of ideas, that's kind of a relatively new unit to the curriculum. A lot of people have been wondering, what is the best approach to that? What did you find helpful in terms of strategies with the framework of ideas? You mentioned a couple of things briefly earlier, but just to really consolidate that for people, if they're trying to prepare for their exams or an assessment on framework of ideas, what were kind of your practical tips?
Yeah, the creative was something that framework was something I was really apprehensive about because I've historically don't like creatives and making up stories because I love a structure. But that in that sense, I would say if you can link it to something you know or write what you know or an experience you've had, it'll really help you have something to come back to and something you'll be able to link your ideas to. For example, we did country, and so I just last year hiked the Overland Track in Tasmania, and so for my SAC I did a memoir of that because it was something I could remember quite clearly. And if you've got an experience related to, if you struggle with making up a story, if you've got an experience you can relate your text to, your essay to, or whatever, that can really help in sort of building like an idea and having something to fall back on. If you don't, like, if making up narratives is not a strength for you, like it's not a strength for me. Although in the exam I did write a narrative, but linked it back to this sort of imagery that I had already. Also, make sure you're looking at the study design for that one, I'd say is really important, just because it's a new unit, they're really focusing on how well you're linking to the framework. And I know in a creative, it can be difficult to stay on track. So looking at the vocab, I don't know if they'll do it again this year, but they had mentor texts this year. And that was something we had to incorporate into our SAC. So read those, take some notes, and then be able to write about it. Or sort of, you don't have to interpret, sorry, but like interpret like a little concept into your story and sort of make sure you link back to that in your SAC. When you're doing your SAC, if you have to write an explanation, I think that's really also useful. Make sure you're put as much, because I know ours was marked the same. Make sure you're putting as much work into your explanation as you did into your story, because also that can be really useful for your teacher or assessor or whoever to like visualize where you were coming from, especially if you didn't finish the story or you felt like it got a little bit lost. Being able to unpack your decisions in what you said is really useful, I think. And especially if you're more analytical like me, the explanation can be a really great way to score some extra marks if you fall down a little bit on the actual creative. And then with the creative, that's the only one where I'd say going in with something sort of pre-prepared is good, because it's quite, when you've got 60 minutes in the exam and the clock's ticking, it's pretty hard to sort of conjure something out of nothing. So if you go in with sort of an idea, don't go in with a whole story, but an idea that you can sort of like meld to the concept, that can be useful. Like for example, I used for the exam, I used sort of the same idea as a narrative I'd written in a practice exam, and sort of made sure it fit the prompt that was given in the exam. But keep linking back to the title. I know you have to have the title in the exam and link back to the title, so make sure you're using similar words, or make sure your story is thematically similar to the title and the prompt as well. So it's clear that and don't forget to write down which prompt you used at the top of the page. I know a few people forgot to do that. So make sure it's really clear to your assessor which one you're using, and that you've read the framework, you know what you're talking about in terms of the theme. And it's really clear to the assessor what concept you're talking about. Do
you have any final advice for students doing the VCE right now, if we kind of zoom out a little bit further? Anything upon reflection?
I probably have my two pieces of advice would be to do subjects that you like, because you will spend way more time studying them if you actually like them. For example, I started the year doing chemistry. I hate chemistry. I'm not particularly good at science. And then I was spending a lot of time focusing on English. I was doing great in English. I did chemistry because I thought it would be, it could be good as a prereq if I ever wanted to do science. I was falling down, and so I ended up dropping it, and then I was really able to focus on the things that I really enjoyed. So I'd say go into it, if you're in year 11 still being subjects, go into it picking subjects you know you'll like, because, and don't, like, if it's accessible, you don't worry about which subjects scale too much or anything like that, because you will inherently do better at subjects that you like, because you're going to spend more time on them and you'll enjoy talking about them and writing about them. It's my first piece of advice. My second piece of advice is to maintain a balance. Don't drop everything to just study, because you won't just study. If you're me, you won't just study, or you'll get really burnt out really quickly. So sort of keep doing the other extracurricular things that you love, or the activities that you love, so that you can sort of separate like things that you enjoy from studying, and that you're not spending too much time, especially early in the year, because you might fizzle out too early. So yeah, I would say keep doing things you love, like right up until, you know, the night before the exam or whatever. So keep a good balance, because it'll help you be able to sit down and then study if you've, you know, been able to go out and do other things to enjoy.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much again, Amelia, for sharing all of your wisdom. I'm sure it's going to help a lot of students out there. So thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.